The Opie and Anthony and Ron and Fez shows are taking a look back with audio from the day's broadcasts. And now, a special 9/11 roundtable discussion with Ron and Fez and the original staff working that day. Here's Ron Bennington.
It's the Ron and Fez show. Fezzy and I wanted to do something here for the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. Something that we've never really talked about that much with the people that were involved, but since we were all on the air that night, we thought we'd get back together with all the people that were on the air with us. It was Fez and I, Earl, Hawk, and Billy Staples. Now, Rory Hamptons and Al Dukes were also part of that show, but they could not make it into the city. When the planes hit, the sports guys were on the air. Then Don and Mike came on after them. O&A were able to broadcast from Long Island. And as the sun went down that night, we did the Ron and Fez show in a way that we had never really done it before, which, of course, in the middle of a tragedy. Our GM at that time, Ken Stevens, Jeremy Coleman, and his assistant, Craig Swab, all made the crazy decision to, instead of just running news like any sensible programmer would have done, but to take these guys that did this crazy shock jock station and put everybody on the air. It was a really unique experience for all of us, and changed the way I think that I'll just speak for myself. It changed for the way I thought about talk radio and about the New York City audience at that time. Because there was so many calls that we took from so many different kinds of people doing so many things. Everybody knows about the victims of 9/11, and everybody knows about the heroes of 9/11. The first responders, the policemen, the firemen, EMTs, even the union guys, which doesn't get talked about enough, but when that tragedy happened, so many guys from the tri-state area grabbed their tools and did everything they could do to work through that rubble without anybody asking them for it. But, you know, those are the big stories from that day. But there was also a ton of small stories and stories that we got to hear that night and over the next couple of months. Stories about people in New Jersey grabbing small boats and making their way over. Stories about people putting strangers in the car with them and driving them home. People like our good friend Hard Rock Johnny, who collected food and stuff and took it down to people working. These were all small stories. And the night of 9/11, the fact of Fez and I and Earl and Hawk and Billy Staples all being together, that is also a small story. But it's our story, and one that we've never talked about. And we pulled all these guys back together after 10 years, and we'll just sit around and talk about what it was like to do radio that night, what worked, what didn't work, and what changed things for us. Here we go. The crew from WNEW that night. It is the Ron and Fez show. Here we are 10 years after 9/11, and through a very slight discussion, we decided to do something, and that was to bring back the guys who were at NEW the night of 9/11 back together. Now, this in no way are we trying to say that we have any more of ownership over that than, of course, the millions of people whose memories go into 9/11. But we thought from a specific point of view, we could just tell you what it was like doing talk radio on that night, September 11th, 2001. And again, of course, the real memories that day go out to the first responders, their families, the people who were in the towers. Those are the real stories of 9/11. But in this case, we thought we'd just give you 5 oddly unique viewpoints of the people who were all together that night, and we hadn't really ever talked about it since. So, of course, Fez Whatley is here with us, and one of the people with us, Earl Douglas, was not even our producer that night. Hawk was our producer, and Billy Staples. Now, we had a much bigger crew, but not everybody could make it in. As a matter of fact, Fez, we didn't get you till the very end, right?
Right. Just about before we went on the air.
It was that long before you could get over from Roosevelt Island?
I think so, because I remember it was already getting dark out when I got off the subway, and I think I maybe had like a half hour, 20 minutes. I hadn't been there all day at WNEW.
Right. So, and I don't remember what time we went on the air, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock that night. I can't really remember. Do you remember, Earl?
I think it was 7.
7 o'clock, which, again, was, it was a very, of course, strange night to be doing radio. But I think for us, particularly strange, because I don't think that I know I had never done traditional talk radio at any point in my life. I mean, I had been in radio for over a decade, but shock jocking it, dick jokes, mean stuff to the interns. So that day to hear, oh, you guys are going live, was a very, very odd thing for me. And I remember the fact of ending up at the station. And I don't know whether you guys are aware of this, but I had to go after my kids first thing in the morning. I went and picked up my son first. He was close. Then went to my daughter's, way on the other side of town. But because some of those kids couldn't get back, I actually took kids back to NEW from her class with us as we were trying to get them home and find their parents. So that was like a remainder part. That was the biggest part of my day. But the weird thing was about us going on the air that night was just how sure our boss, Jeremy Coleman, was that was going to happen. Because to me, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, we'll probably run news, right? Yeah. That seems like the smart things. Why put the idiots on the air that night? But Jeremy had been... from even the first time I saw him of, hey, this is what we do, and, you'll do the show. And I was like, well, you probably want to run 10-10 wins. No, I think it's important that all of our guys go on today. Well, Fez isn't going to make it over. And I don't know whether I'm going to get any producers in. Well, we'll look, and if I need to have a producer with... He was just from the beginning okay about us all going on the air. And I never said anything to him, but inside I was thinking, well, this is a terrible idea. It could not be a worse idea. It was almost to be able to go on the air that night. It seemed like working a completely different job of what you would plan for. Like for me, it was like if you would just start saying, oh, you're going to be painting portraits tonight. It made that much sense to us. So we'll go around the room and found out how, because... Earl, you came in from Queens.
Yeah.
Were you... Now, you weren't part of our show that day. You came in at that point and just produced for us, right?
Yeah, I was in promotions, and I remember just as any other morning, I was getting ready to come in to work at 10 o'clock, and then everything just went completely haywire. And the only thought that came to my head was, for some reason, I don't know why, I was like, I have to get to the station. And I have to get to the station, but as the day progressed, it became harder and harder because it was as close to martial law as we had in New York City.
They did that fairly quickly.
Yeah, by probably like 10:30, no trains, no cars coming in, unless it was emergency vehicles, nothing was coming in. No trains, no anything. So I was stuck at home basically the entire day trying to figure out a way to get here. And I didn't get in until about 5, And by the time I got in, I think Jeremy was one of the first people I saw, and he went, because just whatever the guys need, do it. And he goes, how long do you stay? I was like, I'll stay as long as you want. And he goes, well, Ron and Fez, they might need a producer, because remember, he got the word that no producers were coming in. And I'm like, I'm ready. So there I was. I was there basically the rest of the day.
And of course, the Hawk, you came over from Queens, living in Astoria. Now, you walked across the 59th Street Bridge, the Queenborough Bridge, the Ed Koch Bridge, the bridge with 3 separate names now. But the rest of the city was walking over that bridge to get out, right?
Yeah, I almost felt like a salmon swimming upstream. It was just like these waves of people were just coming at me, and I started thinking to myself, like, maybe I should be going with them in the other direction. Why am I going to, a radio station? What could I help there?
Pardon me, excuse me, pardon me.
It was just really weird, and it was like a salmon going against the water. And
Now, what time did you come over? What time did you walk across that bridge?
I think you were in the office already, Ron, and I helped out with O&A's show a little, just like screening a couple phone calls, so probably like 5-ish or so.
That was, but now in the back of your mind, did you think, hey, we will have work today, or?
No, I thought, like you said, we were going to be running news all day. Like I was going to be editing, sound bites or something like that. I had no idea.
I still think Jeremy made a fantastically bad choice. It just seemed like, and I swear to you, the funny thing about him is like he didn't wrestle with it for a second, And I, of course, did not say, oh no, or I think it's a bad idea, or I'd rather be off home. But inside that whole entire time, I kept thinking, well, we do comedy. Why would we be on the air? It doesn't make it. I mean, obviously, they pulled every other show on TV that night. You know what I mean? And all the music shows were pulled all over town. Only news was running on any kind of station. So bizarre to bring that up. And all of our shows stayed on that whole day. I think the sports guys were on in the morning. Don and Mike, O&A were able to do their show, but they couldn't get into town, so they did it from Long Island. They found them a studio. Billy Staples, you live far out on Long Island, right? How far of a train trip was it for you from Long Island into New York?
The train is usually about an hour. It's anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour to take the just a normal ride.
Yeah.
But I couldn't even tell you on that day how long it was. It's a blur. It really is. And just hearing you talk about the morning with what you went through, it just brought something up that I totally forgot about before I took the train. I remember sitting at home watching it on the news, and all of a sudden, like Hawk, and Earl says, I got to get to the station. And I had no clue how to do it, because at the time the railroad wasn't even running. Then the railroad started running to Penn Station, and only after that were medical and emergency workers allowed into the city from Jamaica. From Jamaica. So that's when I went into the bathroom. So I hid into the bathroom.
You
in
hid on the
Jamaica.
bathroom on the train.
Yeah.
As it was coming in. Now, when you left Long Island, did you think to yourself, I'm going to have to hide to get into the city?
Yeah. I knew,
you knew
exactly.
from the word go.
Yeah, I knew it when I was standing at the platform, thinking to myself, okay, how am I going to do this? I was originally thinking I could, whip out my little, WNEW office, the building pass, as say, like I'm press.
Right.
And figured that might carry a little weight or something. But I'm like,
I forgot we had the CBS badges. Because we used to use that for all kinds of stuff. Hey, CBS is here. I try to get in no matter what was happening in the city.
Even when I went downtown, days later, I wore it around my neck like it's a credential.
Right. I guess if somebody doesn't know any difference, it could get you by things. But so the weird thing is, I don't think that we knew that you were coming in either. Because I remember when I saw you, I cracked up. I'm like, well, how did you get here?
I know, because we didn't even speak. I think you had spoken to Rory or somebody had and said, well, there's no way I can make it in there. And it's like, and then I guess just assumed that
Right.
I wasn't coming in, but
Right.
you know, I'm different.
Well, the other people who worked with us that time, Al Dukes couldn't make it in from Jersey, and Rory couldn't make it in from Long Island. Now, here's the weird thing about us. We never left those guys alone about that. We always busted their ass like, are you coming in tomorrow? Is this another 9/11 for you? I don't understand. But we never gave them a break. And then we'd go in. Hawk made it. Billy made it. Earl could get in. And for whatever reason, we acted like somehow those guys didn't care about their jobs because they didn't make it in. God, men can be just awful.
No, we mean the real team.
And the fact that I was one of the one that made it in was
Yeah.
even worse.
Here's also, just to show you how the world was different. When all this happened, we didn't worry about Fez in those days. You weren't the anxious guy in those days.
No. And I remember I had only 2 stops on the subway to get to WNEW. But I remember thinking, somebody at some point is going to stop me. Whether it's on the subway platform, and then the train came in, and I got out there, and then got out on the sidewalk on 57th Street, completely empty. Not a car, not a person out there except for cops.
That early in the day?
Yeah.
Because when I first got to the station, it was pretty chaotic. People were going in each direction, people trying to get out of the city. I spent a huge part of that day, too, like I said, trying to do something with these kids to make sure that they hooked up with their parents. But at the same time, I don't know whether you guys can remember this, you couldn't exactly reach other people from the city. All of the phone lines were out. So I was out of contact with my family, my parents, in-laws, all those type of people were trying to reach each other, which why it never once dawned on me, Billy, to call you or to call the Hawk.
I forgot about that.
Because the phones just, they were useless.
Yeah, my brother called me. My brother never calls me, ever. He called me, and he went, it took me an hour to reach you. He's like, I was trying your cell phone. I kept getting a busy signal. And then he finally got me on the landline, but he said it took, 10 years ago, the cellular world and the whole phone system was a whole
I got
different.
I got news for you. If something happened again, this phone, just like in the hurricane, we couldn't reach. When the earthquake hit the other day, we couldn't reach each other.
Actually, that's how I found out. My phone was ringing. That's what woke me up. Linda was calling me from her job to wake me up and let me know what was going on because I was clueless. I was sound asleep early in the morning, like 8:30, whatever it was. So yeah, I was that back then. I mean, that time of day, there was still no problem. Like when you came in, things were known then.
Oh,
at
yeah, in
this
the
point.
evening.
That
Yeah,
must
towards
have-
the afternoon.
That must have been so ballsy. I mean, seriously, to get on the subway, knowing what we knew at that point, and there were threats everywhere, and all kinds of different stories.
Well, I remember, when I did get out of the subway by NEW, there was cops yelling at the few people that were out there, get off the street now. And you had no idea why they were yelling that.
So what exactly was being yelled?
There was police officers at every subway station, and as I was walking down the sidewalk to go to NEW, at one point, you couldn't even hear where it was coming from. Cops just started yelling, everyone off the streets now.
Well, there were rumors flying left.
Yeah, the
and
rumors
right
went crazy
that day.
that day, yeah. One of the things that I remember, and it was one of the strangest things, well, to get to my kid's school, I actually came past this building that we're in now because I remember seeing the Fox things and then coming through Times Square where it would be the big scroll, the news scroll, and there was something along the lines of America attacked or something like that, New York City attacked, which made you feel 100% like you were in a Jerry Bruckheimer movie. I mean, who would expect that? And why that was happening, a fighter jet went over the tops of the buildings here. and a woman was yelling on the street, "Are they ours? Is that ours? Is that ours?" And people were trying to calm her down, because you would think to yourself, well, no, jets aren't going to bomb the city. But once this thing started, we expect it to keep going on. No one expected, all right, we're going to explode 2 buildings, the Pentagon, and another plane, and then that will be the end of it. It felt like it was the beginning of something that was going to go on for days, if not months. So at that point, like you just said, Billy, the rumors that were going out and the fact that suddenly you see military in the street, it was a crazy
The biggest
experience.
thing that everyone was going around, that the State Department was hit. That's the rumor. There was like 4
I don't remember that.
planes.
I don't remember that one
Yeah,
either.
well, that was probably on the television when I was still at home. But they were saying the State Department, the Pentagon, both towers.
You being a lifelong New Yorker, Earl, anything like this that you've experienced before or since?
No. This, like I said earlier, this was as close to martial law as we had in the city, where, I mean, even when the first plane hit, everyone kind of had a very, okay, this is an unusual event. That, I mean, people, because remember, the initial report was that it was a small plane and that, it struck the roof. The only worry, of course, everyone had was like, how do we put it out? It was the tallest building, and how do you put it out? But other than that, even when that first plane hit, there was a sense of calm. When the second plane hit, all bets were off. It was just, people didn't know what to do with themselves. I mean, I remember trying like a maniac. I'm still like doing my regular routine, and I just see this wave of people not saying anything, but you could see the panic on their face.
Yeah.
That was a primary day, and you had all the banner planes for people running for mayor flying over the city that past few days before it happened. So it seemed natural is a dumb word, but natural that it was just one of those small planes that accidentally went into the tower.
Yeah, and when they built the towers, that was always their biggest fear. Was that a small? People who complained like it was too big. Like, what if a small plane hit it? How could you? So when it happened, that little mechanism kind of kicked in. It was like, well, they feared this for as long as the building's been up. But once the second plane hit and where it hit, we were like,
When the second plane hit, we're like, oh no.
yeah,
That was
remember, it was
that
only,
was the aha moment.
it was
where
minutes
like-
apart.
Where it was like, oh shit,
Right.
this is real. This isn't an accident. This is an attack.
Yeah.
This is it. We're being attacked on our soil.
Yeah, it was a very strange thing. It is the Ron and Fez show. We put together the team that all went on the air that night in NEW. And I said, and I mean that just from the Ron and Fez show, because, as I said, the sports guys have been on the air before that happened. Don and Mike were on the air doing their shift, which was middays. Then O&A went on the air, and then we came in as the nighttime shift.
And we stayed late.
Yeah, we actually did. We actually for a long time we used to go later because you start to feel a little weird about shutting it off since so many people out there needed to talk. Getting back to the fact of doing radio that night, which is one of the few unique things that we could bring to this story, I felt fairly confident that we would not be doing a show that night. As I came into the station that day, and in the midst of trying to find out how to get some kids to their parents and trying to reach family of mine to let them know I was okay, and people were checking in from all over. By the time I got there, Don and Mike were on the air, and it was kind of Don and Mike. Don Geronimo is a real broadcaster, so those guys went almost immediately into sounding like they could have easily been on CNN. They started doing news talk radio They had Buzz Burbank with them, taking calls, moving things around, reading stuff. And again, I had never done that kind of radio, so that felt like, well, it makes perfect sense to me that we've got Don and Mike on the air. But after that, knowing that O&A weren't going to be able to make it into the city, I thought that we would go into straight news. Jeremy had remarked, we're working on this thing for finding another studio for O&A in Long Island. In the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't think that's going to happen. So I kept going about my day, trying to take care of my own personal stuff, using the office as, a place to keep these kids. O&A did go on the air that day. And I remember hearing them, and the weirdest thing to me was that they sounded like O&A to me. Because inside, the last thing I felt like was myself. And the fact that they went on the air that day and sounded so familiar and sounded so comfortable was almost the strangest thing in the world to me. And I found out later that, that's what Jeremy's point was about having us all work anyway. Was to go on the air and be yourself, and that would bring whatever it brought to the listeners. The listeners would find comfort in it and would be a lot strange for their lives than it would be to suddenly go into news talk radio. And of course, the other part of it was, I think from Jeremy's point of view, and I'm talking for him now, but that's your job, man. You're supposed to be on the air when you have a radio job. There's no excuses. There's no, I've got a problem here, or I've got a problem here. It is your job at that point. So again, to go back to this, Jeremy had no doubt that we'd be all in here doing the show. But inside, I had some amount of doubt. Fez, by the time you showed up, because did you think we'd be able to pull off a show that night?
Oh no, I didn't think Jeremy was going to have us on the air. I didn't think so. I'm like, if I can even get in there, I'm sure that they'll say, no, 1010 wins will handle this. Which I think is what we were throwing it to at the top of the hour anyway.
Well, the reason why we were throwing it to that is we had suspended commercials. So not only that, but to come out of the, where we work now in satellite radio, I can do an hour and a half, 2 hours. I've done the whole show without breaking once. But in those days, what were we playing, Earl? Was it 16 minutes, 18 minutes?
I think it was up to 18.
18 minutes of commercials every single hour. To go from that to, hey, no commercials whatsoever, was an odd shock
Yeah,
to the way you were used to doing radio.
Yeah, because I don't even think the news breaks were only like maybe 5 minutes tops.
I'm not sure about that either. I mean, they think that they said, hey, anytime you want to just throw it to news, throw it to news. And we went on like that for a while, right? I mean, we didn't run, I don't know whether any of you guys remember, Hawk, whenever we started to run spots again. But
I think it was 2 weeks.
Was it at
Yeah, it's
least?
definitely a few weeks for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was easily, I think, 2 weeks. And then,
If not more. 2 weeks was the minimum because we didn't expect it to be that long.
well, and plus all that all the craziness that kind of happened, that crazy paranoia that kind of kicked in. Because remember, at one point, Penn Station got evacuated. And like something was getting evacuated every single night, it seemed.
Right.
And it was like, Chrysler Building, Empire State Building, Penn Station gets Grand Central. There was all these, suspicious package found here, in there, powder found here, powder found there. So we didn't know when, like you said before, we didn't know when it was going to end. We just thought it was like the first wave of whatever this was. So that's probably the reason why we went commercial free for so long.
Well, and also the advertising business had no idea what to do. What are you selling now?
It's hard to sell horny goat weed when we've just been attacked.
And yet, I never needed it anymore. I never needed it as much as I needed it that night. But at, when people bring us up to us about being on the air at 9/11, I don't think it felt any difference from us on 9/11 or 9/12 or 9/13, 9/15, October 5th, October 10th, it still had that feeling. So really, a lot of people will say to me, hey, we listened to you that night, it really helped. But they might even mean 2 months later. People felt that feeling for a long, long time in New York, New Jersey, Long Island, Connecticut. I mean, it was a long time before that feeling went away.
There was a tone set in those shows the first few days, 9/11, 9/12. There was a tone set in I'll say the persona of the show, how it almost became much more intimate with the audience.
I would agree 100% with that. And I would actually think on a professional thing is that 9/11 was the first night that I ever gave any thought to working in talk radio. Before that, I just felt like I came in, I did jokes, I laughed, we did stunts and stuff like that. But I never felt like I did talk radio. If someone said, "Are you a talk radio host?" I would have said no. In those days, I probably felt like a comic on the radio more than anything else. I thought it was a place to come in and do gags and leave. If anything, yell at the callers or make fun of them. But after 9/11 is the first time that I thought, there is a community that's attached through talk radio. And there is a service about that, which, again, I think Jeremy got way more. He understood that before the rest of us did. Maybe because he had given talk radio some thought, and I never had, like, what is your job in talk radio, or what does the audience expect from you? But I'd certainly never given it a lot of thought before then.
I never gave it a lot of thought that what Jeremy actually pulled together that day to get a studio for O&A, to organize Ron and Fez, to get you guys together on the air, to organize Don and Mike still, the feed from Washington. I don't know the technicalities.
No, they were here in New York.
Oh, were they?
Don and Mike were here in New York that day.
Because they used to do shows a couple of days a week from the
they would do it back and forth. You're exactly right. And it just so happened they were in New York. Now, here's what you have to remember from their point of view, is Washington, D.C. was attacked at the same time. So here those guys were in New York and not being able to reach their people back at home. And the two cities that they were connected to got attacked. So I had no idea of whether their families were with them or apart and who they had there. Obviously they had homes in both places. So, all that stuff had to be pulled off that day.
There was a lot of aspects of this day that I never realized. You with the children, Don and Mike being here, Jeremy. I mean, all I remember is obviously the attacks and what we did. I didn't realize all this ancillary stuff was going on because it's just so focused on the one thing. A lot of people did a lot of things that day to get these shows on the air.
And again, as we went back to, this was the smallest part of the 9/11 story there could possibly be. A city had to be pulled together. And in the middle of that, I think talk radio played fair witness. The other part of the two other parts of that is about going on the air that night is I had nothing to say to people. There was nothing that I wanted to crack a mic and say, look, I've been giving this some thought, and this is what I want to talk to you about. And even though I didn't say that to Jeremy, that's what inside I was thinking of. I'm sure there's somebody who can pull people together or say the right things, but I don't think it's us. About the time that we went on the air, for me, looking over and seeing the phone bank just, and you were running the phones in those days, Billy.
Yeah.
And the phones immediately lit up. We had something like 9-10 lines that stayed lit for months. And in the term of talk radio, for me, it almost became like I was doing listen radio. Every single phone caller had something to say, and everything was covered in between fear, anger, loss, shock, hope,
Hatred.
desperation. It didn't really matter what it was. Each single call was a whole new way to look about it. And that's what our show became. And I also remember that night, as the sun was going down, you could feel just the weirdness of what had happened. That it was one thing to be in the city with the lights on, with the sun out during the day. But as it started to get dark, the people who their minds were going to run, that was the time that it started to happen.
With this bright, eerie glow coming from lower Manhattan, which you could see from everywhere, it seemed like. From ground zero, with all the lights going from on
And
down
the fact
there.
that it was still burning, too.
Yeah.
And it burned for a week, right?
But those lights, it was so
More than
lit
that.
up.
Yeah.
No, I just remember, I remember leaving that after that first night, walking down the street. How it was funny because it was very quiet. The street, I mean, no one was on the streets, but every once in a while you pass a bar and every bar was packed. Like it was just this odd thing kind of happening where, like, I remember walking down 7th Avenue and I kept hearing this. I have to walk 4 blocks to catch the subway, and I kept every 40 seconds I kept hearing this weird noise, and then it dawned on me it was the street light. I never heard the sound of the street lights changing.
Just like, yeah.
And that's how quiet it was. And that's when it really, like, it was almost like a bad dream. And like, New York, and particularly Manhattan, never is not. It's always noisy. It's always active. So something's always going on. And to walk down the street and hear absolutely nothing, but you could literally hear the shoes hitting the sidewalk.
Yeah, you could have bowled on 57th Street that first night, which is probably one of the more busier streets.
Yeah,
in
it's an
America.
intersection. It was basically if you're coming from the east side, that's where you come off the bridge, and you go straight down 57. You go east to west. I mean, it's a major cross that nothing, zero. There was. I remember the one image I'll never forget in my life is in the middle of this intersection. There was a cop with a flare, trying to direct traffic that is not there, and he's crying. He's hand in his head, hand in his face. He's crying, and he's clearly there to direct whatever traffic needs to go, but there was no traffic, and it was just this really, what was that movie? Was it Vanilla Sky with the?
Yeah.
I had no bravery to try to walk down Times Square because they said that was empty too, so. That quietness once the sun came down was so creepy.
And Hulk, you've lived in this town your whole life. You never lived anywhere else.
Yeah, Queens my whole life.
So had you ever seen the city?
No, it was like Earl was saying, it was so silent. It was just eerie. And it was just, actually I had to work. I stayed at the station that night because no one else could come in. And that next morning I was walking down 7th to go to Times Square. I don't think I saw a single person except for like a police officer. So it was like it was just surreal. It was almost like a disease had hit and you're like the last survivor.
Yeah, they've done a million movies like that before where, you're that person, but to actually be in it. So you stayed in the station to help produce around the clock, and you did the same, Billy? You were staying in the station as well?
I stayed and did the phones for the sports guys next morning.
And those guys made it back into the city, or they had stayed over? Or?
Yeah, I believe they did stay somewhere because they were there bright and early because I was woken up when they got there because I was sleeping in their office.
I think the weirdest thing about working at that radio station, WNEW, which was the most pirate radio station in the history of the world. I mean, literally. It was like Pirates had shows. Every single show was crazy in their own way. I mean, so much that no one thought that our show was particularly weird. I mean, everywhere that we had ever worked in our life, we were the freak shows. And when we got the NEW, man, that's a freakish.
I used to tell people we're the tame show.
Yeah, it felt like
You guys were the voice of reason.
Yeah,
I said we followed the bad guys.
but at that thing that everybody then had to pull and go into another direction. And I remember that people were doing stuff like, well, Letterman went on a week after, and then Jon Stewart and Leno were the next night, and that those guys had went on the air and cried when they were doing their opening show. But the talk shows at WNEW had put in well over 100 hours before those guys were able to go back on TV. We went live, all the shows, immediately, and stayed live. And again, none of those shows were serious shows. And yet at that time, you had this thing of, because they ever, what they were worried about was Saturday Night Live and Letterman, is will the nation ever laugh again? Can people tell jokes? No one will, it's hard to go back, and nor should you go back and remember how crushed people were, where they thought to themselves, I'm never going to laugh again. Nobody had any idea when we would do normal radio again, if at all.
I was afraid when we first started to supposedly get back to normal radio, when we started running spots again. I was sitting there afraid for the first joke. I remember feeling that, like, what is going to happen? It was the eeriest thing. And like that first night, Ron, on 9/11, when I had no idea what we were doing, and I remember sitting at the phone booth, and I'm looking up at you like this little boy who's like, help me, tell me what's going on. And it's like Nipper, that dog with the, into the, I'm going, Ron, help me, what am I doing here? Tell me. And you would say, Billy, just let the people call. Just let them talk. Let them express what they're feeling. Don't, no screening per se. Don't tell them what to say. Don't lead them in a direction. Like there was hatred, there was anger, there was crying. People were asking for loved ones by name.
Yeah, that was the toughest stuff at all, that people would say, look, my brother works there, and I know that there's different places that some of those things are online, and people go, oh, did you ever go back and listen to the 9/11? And I go, I could never in a million years go back and listen to any of those shows. I will never go back and listen to any of those shows. It's never going to happen. But the stuff that you said that, hey, I'm looking for this person, I'm looking for that person. He was working in this tower, he might have gotten out. And to know now what I didn't know then is, no, man, nobody who was above a certain floor was ever going to be found again. Any of those firemen who went into that building, any of those policemen who went into that building, any of those emergency workers who went into that building were never going to be found again.
All the doctors and medical people that they called down there were just walking around with nothing to do. It was the eeriest thing. And this was still 2 days later when I finally went down there.
And those calls, those particular calls, the amount of them just kept getting bigger and bigger.
And when people would say somebody's name, that made it real.
And try to describe them.
Yeah, what they were wearing, where they worked, what floor they were on. Has anybody seen them? They were wearing this today, that today. He had a ring, anything. And when they would say a name, it's my husband, it's my kid, all of a sudden it became, okay, this is a real person we're talking about now. Not just a bunch of people. We're talking about this husband of this person on the telephone.
Now, you were screening telephone calls. I mean, did we go on like that for ever? It seemed like, it wasn't one night, it wasn't 1 week. It just seemed like it was months and months and months that people felt desperate, anxious, whatever that happened to be.
there was no way we could ever get to everyone who wanted to do it, everyone who had an emotion, a feeling to express. And that's why we kept staying later and later and later. It was so hard to shut the mic off.
Well, that's very weird that you said that, because I remember what day did 9/11 fall on? Was it
Tuesday.
That was a Tuesday.
And I remember the first day we were off, it was a Saturday. And this was like the first disconnect that Fez and I ever had. Is that night I'm like, maybe we should go back in and do the show, because it felt weird not to be in. And Fez was like, dude, really? Because I'm exhausted. And that was like that point that it started to show that people were going in different directions of like who needs to turn it off and who feels like if I attempt to turn it off, then anxiety will hit me. You know, like the only thing that I felt like I knew how to do then was just be on the radio. Anything else felt like it was too weird to me. But just to go to show you how it never was like a one-night thing, I remember I went to see my parents at Thanksgiving. And when I pulled out of the Lincoln Tunnel and started heading down New Jersey Turnpike, I felt guilty. It felt really weird to leave the city. And that was months later. And I can't explain why it felt guilty, but it just felt like you're leaving the city behind. It just felt like the worst idea.
I just felt lost. When I remember again that every night I would leave, I would just feel like really, like, am I like I should? Like you felt like you could be doing more. You know what I mean? It was like it didn't feel like you said. You felt a sense of guilt. It was like, did I do enough? Did I? You know? And it's like, why am I going home? Why am I sleeping?
There wasn't anything that you could do.
Yeah,
I mean, you could not be doing. You couldn't pick anything with your life that helps less more than radio. I mean, you could. It's between this and robbing banks, I think, just to show that you're not living up to. But it was one particular time where people were like, no, we need to talk. And you could tell that when people called up, and if they were angry and they got to be angry, if they were sad, if they were scared, that by the end of that phone call, they got out what they needed to do. You also have to remember that this was a pre-Twitter world. No Facebook, no MySpace. So the social networking wasn't done at all. In some ways, 10 years ago feels like 30 years ago.
Well,
you know?
I had been up that morning. The towers had already been hit, but it wasn't online yet. It wasn't on AOL. And I was just looking through news. And like I remember like the biggest story that was going on was Anne Heche talked crazy on an ABC interview. And I thought that's the biggest thing in the news today. And it still hadn't hit AOL, even after the second tower had been hit.
So you're saying like in those days, like even updating took,
Yeah.
you know, where now you would know immediately, everywhere would explode with it. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way. But yeah.
That's when it started to kill me, was the 24-hour news networks. You couldn't stop watching.
You didn't want to turn it off.
You couldn't. You'd go from one to the other to the other. And they all had the same story. The same, crawlers across the same, bottom of the screen. But you just had to you couldn't turn off.
Right.
What if something happens?
And I remember, Billy, you became one of those patriotic guys where you brought your flag from home.
Yep.
And we let you put it up in the window. We're like, yeah, put it up in the window.
That was my dad's flag. That was from my dad's funeral. So that's how much that meant to bring that in.
And there were some flag people. There were some. Billy was. No, here's how. No, this is the weirdness, though. You were the let's attack them, let's nuke them guy, which oddly people won't get this. So was Fez.
Absolutely.
From the beginning.
Yep.
I don't remember which side of it I was on, but I remember yelling at Al Dukes once for putting on Peace, Love, and Understanding, coming back from a break, and I felt like that was a slight against the troops. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing, Al? You know the Marines are going over there. We were just crazy. I mean, any kind of saneness left. But then you went to a candlelight vigil
Union Square.
down in Union Square and became a peace nut overnight. You wanted nothing but peace.
Everyone was holding a candle, and it was such. Okay, now I'm going to sound hippie-ish a little bit, but I was standing in the dog park, the dog run, and I didn't even know it what I was walking in, but such a vibe of like that old hippie feeling of like, you know, the old Coke commercials I like to teach the world to sing, where everyone was like hugging. And I remember climbing on top of a Caterpillar bulldozer to see from above, you know, to get a glimpse of all these people. And at that point, I looked up and saw the fighter jet, like you had mentioned. And I'm like, okay, do I want that? Or do I want this warmth and love and community that I'm feeling? And yeah, it switched me. It really
So
did.
you basically, Billy, you saw yourself as you're there, you're the Marine with your gun, and then a hippie put a flower in it, and you'd suddenly changed.
Until Bush gave the speech, and then I went back again.
Earl, did much change for you after that?
I had to change my whole. I had more questions than answers. You know, it was just sort of like. I remember reading. There was a Time magazine piece, and basically, it summed up. It's like this wasn't an attack on a policy. This was an attack on us. And I said, okay, what is, like, where is this anger coming from? Where this incredible act of cowardice comes from? Like, what are we doing wrong? Because I never bought into that whole idea of like, well, they attacked us because of our freedoms. It just seemed
That
very.
is why they attacked us, because we have freedom.
And
They were jealous of our freedoms.
but it seemed very. But the way it was said, it seemed very empty to me. You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, like as much as there's a shred of truth in that, there's something else with that.
Oh, don't become a Bill Maher.
I'm not becoming a Bill Maher. I'm not. I'm just,
yeah, you got very angry with Bill Maher then too, Billy.
Calling them, like, what did he say? They were not cowards. They were brave to crash the planes.
Well, he said
into
it
the
wasn't
building.
a cowardly act to do it. That, you know, might be an insane act, but not cowardly. And he ended up losing his gig over that, and, you know, luckily going to HBO, where he still does a great show this day.
I tell you, if he would have been there at that restaurant that night when we walked in,
He was there.
He was.
when I walked back,
You
he
know
was
it.
gone.
Nothing happened. You wouldn't have done anything, nor should you have.
no, but I had to kind of you ask questions. You ask, and I just thought, and to this day, I'm still kind of figuring out. I was like, are we better now than we were 10 years ago? Are we safer now than we are 10 years ago? Are we, are we better because of the Patriot Act? Are we better because, all these things that happened in the aftermath of that? I was like, has it made us a better nation? And I don't know. I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm still asking those questions.
Let me go over to the Hulk. Hulk, did things change for you that day?
Yeah, it just shifted your perspective on, like, everything just more globally and what's happening in the world, and how, like, people can actually hate you or hate your country. And it was just spooky. I mean, I always wondered what it was like to, like, be in Pearl Harbor or whatever. And totally 9/11 felt like that for me. It's just once everything stopped, the city was empty, it was quiet, and it was like you actually thought it was like the start of another world war or something.
Yeah, it was almost ridiculous that it wasn't the start. That when you finally got into your head that, wait, they're not going to keep this going. What did they hope to accomplish by that one stupid thing that they did?
I remember the newspaper, I think the Daily News the next day, they said, I remember the headline is like, it's war and 10,000 feared dead. And you're like, and that number just kind of like, wow. It's like 10. It's like, how can we bury 10,000?
I forgot
people?
about that, how big they thought the death toll was.
There was no way to know.
Yeah.
There was no possible way to know, because the people who came out of the buildings just kept going. No one went over for a roll call. So it was a long time with names on that figured out, hey, have we just not heard back from them, or was that person lost? There wasn't any way to figure it out.
Because people were always wondering still, are they shell-shocked? Are they hurt in a hospital somewhere? You know, they never gave up hope for the longest time that somebody was maybe sick and in a hospital with a, you know, not knowing who they are.
Yeah, you thought they were either injured or whatever. Yeah, there's just thousands and thousands of just heartbreaking stories out there.
It just doesn't make you feel safe anymore. I mean, even to this day, 10 years later, there is still this underlying cause still to not hate Muslims. It's still, you know, like reports, TV shows now are going, you know what, you can't hate a whole community of people just because of one incident. It's still going on 10 years later. People, you know, that anger from that night, hating a whole
Well, but you know, do you remember feeling when Osama bin Laden was killed? I didn't particularly feel any better about it. You know, I know some college kids went out and were dancing in the streets, but I didn't go dancing in the streets.
Yeah, I found myself asking those same questions I asked 10 years ago, all over again. I was like, does this make us better? Does it make us safer? Does it make us, you know, does it end anything? Does it give, I mean, for families, it was a sense of closure, and I completely understand that, but there was still kind of this open-endedness to it all. It's like, I was like, I wasn't happy, or I wasn't sad either, you know, and it was crazy.
Here's what surprises me. Here we are 10 years later, and I look around at you four guys, and we're all together, and still not one of you is married. And I'm like, what kind of a weird thing goes on here?
I think it's just the radio industry attracts single people.
I don't know.
Confirmed bachelors.
But if there's something that, you know, you guys would have put out there, I'm telling you, I accept all four of you.
Where
no
did
matter
that
what
come
it is.
Hey,
I'm just saying. It seems odd to me.
No one's even dated.
No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, that hurts. Wow.
Yeah, it is. I want to get it across.
Yeah, like Rory's married with a kid. I think Al's been dating some people on and
That's
off.
all because they didn't come in that night. They didn't have it stick to them. Isn't that funny that we didn't invite them back? They did every other night with us, but they missed the 9/11. Rory is one floor above us, and he hasn't been invited down for this show.
He's probably walking past the window looking at
9/11 was another event for you, Billy, because you had been sober for how long before 9/11?
At that moment, 9 months
And 9/11,
was
back off the wagon.
Yeah, it was. You know, when you want to be among family, when something bad happens, you know, you
By
want
family, do you mean Budweiser's?
drunks,
Okay.
alcoholics.
Right.
That was family, and as silly as it may sound, as a joke and whatever, that's where I felt comfortable. I felt safe. I was around my people, my family. You know, Ron, you ran and got your children.
Yeah.
You did, you know, the family thing.
Right.
I was alone at home, and after coming into the city, walking, I was like feeling, I guess, just alone, and I just walked into a bar. I heard people, they were drinking, and I'm like, okay, I'm part of my family. I feel at home. I feel normal now. And an excuse, okay, sure, but it's weird. It made me feel safer, calmer,
Right.
better, you know, not so alone. And I didn't know anybody either. I didn't know a soul.
But, you know, why we're talking about this whole thing, the fact that you came to work drunk that night, I still...
Yet denied it.
Yes, you did deny it. When I was like, what smells like a brewery? I know it's not Billy. He's going to meetings. I'm sure quite a few people fell off that time. Although, there were meetings all over the city that night if you wanted to.
I went trying to bar hop after the show. I just didn't want to stay at the station, alone again. And there was no cabs, absolutely no cabs. And one of the cab drivers told me that none of the foreign cab drivers, no matter what, wanted to work. They were afraid.
Yeah, I think that those were rumors too. I don't know whether any of that stuff ever turned out to be true or false. I will say this too, back about that period. I remember that I was at a show the final spring, and I think it had to do with the Tribeca Film Festival, which would have been probably May or something like that.
Late April, early May.
Yeah. And there was a show, and it was Wycliffe, and it was a free show outside. And it was Wycliffe Jean, it was the Counting Crows, it was Sheryl Crow, it was David Bowie, all one day. And people were out there, like Billy Crystal was there, and Whoopi Goldberg, and Robert De Niro, and Robin Williams, and Jimmy Fallon. Everybody was just putting on a show. And at one point, I looked around, and we were not that far. We would have been right underneath the towers. And it had to be a full 6 months after. And people were dancing around and having a great time. And then I looked around, and a bunch of people, while they were dancing, were crying because it had been the first time that they had danced in so long. And they either were guilty they were danced, or they were happy that they were dancing, just feeling something. But the whole thing of getting back together and talking about 9/11 and doing radio as if it was just one night, I think is a crazy thought, because it went on and on and on for a long time.
I think it changed the show. We started doing more serious
Well, we
issues.
started doing talk radio after that.
Yeah.
After that thing that we got in touch. Not only that, but it was for the first time in my life where I stopped, ignoring that the audience were people, like you talked about. We had a very big show in Florida, and we would show up, and there would be thousands and thousands of people when we would do events. We would come out, wave, do something, wave, and leave without ever knowing who the people were. But after 9/11, we started to set up the bar crawls, inviting people into the studio to hang out with us, to do stuff. At that point, you start to go, I want to know who these people are. Then we started to go to Bar 9 and just not so much perform for people like we used to do, but just hang out, be friends. And I think that only recently started to subside after all these years. That closeness, of just finally moving back. But those people that we became friends with after 9/11, before that I would have called them listeners. After that I would have called them friends.
Easily.
And there's a ton of people. GVAC comes to mind, Chris the Cobb.
Mikey D.
Yeah, just tons and tons of people. All the girls that we met after that. So yeah, we did it. Yeah, it did change the way we did radio. We talked about this too. Is the following night? It was 9/12 was the first time that we ever talked to Hard Rock Johnny about putting stuff together and running thing together. And Johnny had gotten it into his mind that he was going to help out the guys. And it gave us the opportunity to start talking about those things on the air. Anything that was making us feel more and more part of it was terrific. Just terrific to be a part of.
Yeah, I remember the Hard Rock put together all those events. Basically, we helped the rescue and recovery to we need gloves. So
they were a staging area.
yeah, they were a staging area. If you want to donate gloves, if you want to donate.
Yeah, but here's what would happen, Earl. They would go, all right, they need gloves. Then our next phone call would be this. Could you please tell people to stop bringing gloves? Mm-hmm. That's how quickly the people wanted to get involved. that quickly, where moments after you said they need water, hey, could you tell them to stop bringing water? We've got 1,000 cases. I mean, it was crazy how people reacted to stuff.
Yeah, for how a city so big basically became this little community.
It is,
Yeah,
though. It
and-
is a community. You're right. And you really got to know it after that.
That's one of the things that people called about. I forgot. They were asking for things, where to bring things, where to donate, websites, Red Cross information, a lot of things like that. I remember going down there and handing out masks. I still have my little mask, that they, like the operating room mask.
Oh, I forgot that everybody was wearing those because of some of the stuff that was burning off.
The aroma, the smell down there didn't go away for months.
Death.
No.
Just death. I think we should get ready to wrap up. You brought this thing from Jeremy, though. That was something that he sent out to the staff, I guess, was emails. And this was less than a week later, but I guess he was just starting to get a part of it. Here's the part that I will read that he sent out to everybody. The end result is that WNEW did what radio stations are supposed to do, stood by its audience. That is something that I didn't realize at the time is why he wanted us to come in and work. That is what I didn't realize at the time, that I was going to get most out of that entire experience, that it stopped being faceless and start being about us, connecting with each other. No, I don't think at that point there was a big difference of whether you were the host or a caller or you were somebody like Johnny who was coming together saying, here's how we can help, and you were the people helping. Everybody was together in that community thing. And in the middle of all that tragedy, it felt like a good place to be. It felt like a blessed place to be because you felt involved. I know also at that point, it was the first time, I think I can speak for you, Billy, I don't know about the other times, but you stopped hating cops. Before that, no one ever had a good word to say about cops. After that, we treated cops like human beings again.
Yep.
So many people who were not, did not call the show that had been listeners told me later that night, the night of 9/11, that they turned on the show, even if it was just to hear our voices, to know that we were okay, and then turned it back off again. So many people have told me that exact story. And no matter what they were doing, I think that was just their way of checking on people who lived in the city. It didn't even have to be us in particular, but they just wanted to know that somebody they know who listened to that lived in the city. Another thing about staying on so long after that is, and I brought up the stuff about cops, and Fez and I had the same experience as Earl of walking down the street and seeing a couple cops holding each other. I never forget those guys crying, knowing that was probably friends of theirs that they lost or hadn't heard back from. And then it went on where so many guys worked for so long on that pile. And so many of them are sick, not backed up, not taken care of. But those guys used to listen to us for a long, long time. And one night before I left, a cop stopped by, pulled me aside, thanked me for the kind of stuff that we did, and handed me his badge. And I'm not going to give out his name because he told me not to, but this is kind of to all of us.
Oh man.
Yeah, that I've always kept that with me ever since. And it's been about almost 10 years now.
You never
But
told us.
why would I? Then you'd ask to hold the badge, and I'm not going to go through that.
No,
I really feel like
that's
it's my
very
badge.
special. No, that's.
I feel like it's my badge, Billy, and if
Yeah.
you want to keep it for a couple years, that's up to you.
No, that's really something.
But that is one of those things that, again, we didn't do anything but be on the radio. But I think sometimes just going and doing your job is the whole thing. So I honestly want to thank you guys for being there that night and sharing that strange experience. Not just then, but for what took place months and months after that. I also want to thank the audience for being open to connect with us at that point. You know, I had this love affair for New York long before I moved here. I was just crazy about the city. But to be there through those days, I'll love New York forever now. I will love New York forever. And also, I want to thank Jeremy, who really, I wouldn't have done the show if it was up to me. And I'm glad that all of us had that experience together. Earl came out with a song that we used to end the show with because it was a hit at the time, and it just seemed to fit perfectly. And that's a U2 song. So we'll end this like we always do with this U2 song. Hawk, thanks for coming in, buddy.
Thank you. Thanks.
Billy Staples.
Ron, you're the rock. Thanks.
No, you're the rock, and I'm just the roll, buddy. Earl Douglas, great to see you again.
Always great to see you. I'm getting choked up. I'm
And-
really am.
Well, that's because, I hate to say this, but you're a little bit of a sissy. That's the only reason you're feeling that way. Fez Whatley, and we will end it the way we did so long ago and for so many nights with you too. And I do think it makes sense. Walk on.
This retrospective was